David, it was only this time last week that we were talking about Coleraine and Linfield drawing 2-2 and what a fantastic game it was. Here we are a week on and we're getting ready for another clash between these two title contenders. This time it's at Windsor Park. It's Saturday night. It's a 5:30 kickoff. It's a massive game for all manner of reasons. Not least because when it comes to the league, it feels like David Healy and Linfield really need a win. Now, we'll be honest, we're recording this before the Welders Linfield game in the League Cup. But putting that to one side, this is a big game for Linfield and they could really do with a statement win.
Massive game for Linfield, of that there is no doubt, particularly given the recent form of Coleraine. When you reflect back on that game that we talked about last week, it was absolutely outstanding, full of entertainment, particularly for the neutral. I think that there's a lot of noise around this game and around the fact that there are a number of folk from various areas who says, we really need to win this game. Linfield need to win this. David Healy needs to win this game. At the risk of boring folk, I understand that situation probably better than anybody else other than David himself. Having managed Linfield for nearly 17 and a half years, there was many times when there was games which were must-win games that there's no way Linfield can be beaten or should be beaten or whatever else. Listen, we're only 14, 15 games into the season. Linfield have a couple of games at least on hand, on the other title challengers. Could Linfield do with a win? Yes, they could. Of course they could. And if they did that, that would be a massive confidence booster. I think particularly after the frustrations of the game against Cliftonville, which was very clear to see, in terms of the performance, in terms of maybe lack of goal scoring opportunities. It was a game which won't last long in the memory of anybody, and that's sometimes you just get games like that. I'm not being critical, it just happens to be the case. But certainly over this little sort of bit of a patchy run, I think is the best way of describing it. Linfield certainly could do with a win. Do they absolutely need? No, they don't. We're too early in the season. There's some people listening to, and their opinion is, well, if Linfield don't win on Saturday, we might as well say goodbye to the Gibson Cup and that's the season over. I don't know how many times, I heard that during my tenure. But certainly it is a massive, massive game. But it's also a massive game, Keith, for Coleraine. Rory has been very skilled and correctly looking to protect his players from the demands of expectation. But from the outside looking in, they have spent well. Spent big, and there's no point denying that. And with that, at whatever level you're at, if compared to your competitors, you have spent a big amount of money, then there is an expectation.
And they've played two really big games so far at the Coleraine Showgrounds, the Glentoran defeat and then the Linfield draw, and they haven't won them, so maybe they need a big one.
Well, you see, that's it. Everybody's looking at David Healy and at Linfield Football Club, and I'm sort of taking a step back and thinking, well, why are we not looking at Rory Higgins and Coleraine as well? And that's based on the squad that has been assembled. Now, nothing happens, absolutely straight away. You look at the time that Tiernan Lynch had at Larne, and it took a couple of seasons before they really got to the point where they won back-to-back championships. But for me, while Saturday is a massive test for Linfield and for David Healy, it's a massive test for Coleraine and Rory Higgins. It's a big game, and I would suggest from the outside looking in that there's as much a need for Coleraine to win as there is for Linfield to win, if only to solidify their Premiership aspirations.
I want to push you a little bit on David Healy, and I'll tell you why. He's in a position where he's a man who's won multiple trophies for Linfield, many league titles, yet he still finds himself in a position where he's receiving criticism, and we know there's some Linfield fans, certainly not a majority, who might want to see him moved on. You've had that experience. How does that feel? It must hurt when you know that you've delivered so much success, yet people are still saying, we don't rate you.
That's the nature of football. And I suppose particularly that's the nature of Linfield Football Club, and that's the nature of any big club who are historically, always being successful. Um, what David is experiencing is no different to what I experienced, is no different to what Roy Coyle experienced, and that's just the manner of where you're at. I think that how you manage it, how you handle it is vitally important, and it ultimately comes down to yourself, the individual. I know that there was a very definite time in my career where I thought, well, enough is enough, because there's nothing more I can do which is going to satisfy folk. We had won 6 doubles in 7 years. We had won a clean sweep, but during that particular season, 2005, 2006, at the back end of 2005, we'd won the Santander Cup. So we'd done all sorts of things, and when it came, the season 2014, then I knew myself, really maybe now is the time when you need to look at what's best for the club and what's best for myself. Were you hurt by some of the criticism? Of course you were hurt. I'm not going to say that you weren't. It does when people are doubting your credentials and particularly, the service that you've given. But again, that's only... Again, it's not everybody, Keith. And for me, you've got the fors and the against, and then you've got the ambivalence in the middle. And when things are going well, the ambivalence will go with the fors. When it's not going so well, then they will go with the against. But there is that sometimes sizable minority, but the sizable number of supporters get it. They understand and are fully appreciative, and that's exactly the same as what David will find as well. There are those who will get on their keyboards, who will make all sorts of silly statements, but and no doubt it doesn't matter what you say, it does get to you, and you don't want your family to be reading stuff and whatever else. The way I dealt with it up until I decided that my time was up was I turned it in and just made me more determined. I thought, fine, I'm going to keep going here. I'm going to make sure my players keep going, and I'm not giving up on anything. And I'm not suggesting for one single second that David should be considering, whether it is his time to go or whatever else. There's lots of work still there to be done, lots of what he wants to do. He talks about how proud he is of managing Linfield, what a privilege it is. Look at what they did just last year in terms of how they won the league. Let's put this in perspective. And there are cycles. You've got to build teams and rebuild and build and rebuild. And for me, that's possibly where Linfield are at this moment in time. So, yes, the outside noise and the outside criticism does hurt. And you do try to guard yourself as best as possible. For me, ultimately, the time was when I thought, well, there's nothing more that I can do that will be satisfy anybody's need and maybe right for me, right for the club, right for the supporters to have someone else in place. But I am not, as I say, for 1 second suggesting that should be the case for David Healy to be thinking about or anybody else to be thinking about. I think there's a lot of noise coming from outside, which maybe people are listening to, and they want, at this moment in time, they want to regroup, get together and go forward as one.
We can't talk about Linfield and Coleraine and not talk about Joel Cooper. It's his first game back at Windsor Park.
Yeah.
He's going to get a bit of a rough reception, there's no doubt about that. Joel, how will he handle it?
He will be, to be honest with you, totally oblivious to it. Here's a young man who, when you go back to last year, when it was announced that he'd signed a pre-contract, and for me, Linfield made the correct decision in making sure that he didn't go to Coleraine then, because if you remember, Keith, they wanted to take him at that part of the season. His contribution was most significant. He was professional. He did all that he had to do to help Linfield, win the league. As I said, I hold no blame whatsoever. We're now in a full-time era, so he got a better offer at Coleraine than what was available to him at Linfield. this day and age. That's fine. And for me, he made it a decision that was right for him and right for the family. Come Saturday, there will be those who will understandably give him a bit of jip. That's fine, part and parcel of it. Don't Joel Cooper, he'll just say fine, bring it on. And because here's the thing about it that people maybe should realise, that when people are giving out to you and maybe giving you a bit of abuse and a bit of stick, that suddenly becomes the greatest motivator of the lot. It becomes a fantastic motivator. I know it, at different context. But if I was, when I was managing and I went to clubs where maybe the support wanted to have a particular go at me, bring it on. Bring it right on. Because I tell you what, that's the biggest compliment you can pay me. Because if I wasn't doing my job right, as a player or as a manager, you wouldn't be saying anything. You wouldn't be, so given where he's at, I would suggest that Joel will use that as a big motivating factor.
Quickly, prediction?
Prediction, 2 each.
1-1.